Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started momentarily. Want to give folks time to come in. Maybe wait for another minute or two, Patrice, and we'll start.
Okay, sounds good.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. All right, the time is now 2:32 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It may be 1:32 p.m. your time. However, we want to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. We have a great guest who's going to be talking with us about some very informative things. So I don't want to take up too much time with intros, but today's webinar session is titled From Local Farms to National Markets. Next slide, please. So before we go further, I want to make sure we take care of some housekeeping. So the first thing is that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to Freedmen Heirs Foundation website as well as our YouTube channels. We're asking that attendees keep your microphones muted so that we don't have any background noise. And also the chat and Q&A functions are enabled. We ask that if you have general questions for Patrice or myself, that you shoot us a chat. However, if you have questions about Lauren's presentation, we ask that you drop them in the Q&A. And lastly, all questions for this particular webinar will be held at the end of the presentation. Next slide.
Having some technical difficulties. There we go.
Okay. So just a little bit about us. We don't want to take up too much time because we do want to make sure that we allow Lauren the optimal time that she has, but we are Freedmen Heirs Foundation. My name is Seneca Edwards Heron, and I am one of the founders and executive director of Freedmen Heirs. And our mission and vision is to support Black farmers through access to technical assistance, access to capital, and access to new market opportunities. As you can see here on the page, you can visit us at freedmenheirs.org or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and now we have a YouTube channel. So please join in. A couple of questions that we have right now, Patrice, about where we are. It seems as if the chat feature is disabled, but the Q&A feature works. And yes, there will be a review later for those that are asking.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So without further ado, I want to introduce Lauren Horning, who is the Director of Local Sourcing and Sustainability at Freshpoint. So I'm going to go through and quickly read her bio, and then I will turn it over to you, Lauren. Lauren Horning is the National Director of Local Sourcing and Sustainability at Freshpoint, the nation's largest produce and dairy distributor. Growing up on a hobby farm inspired Lauren's passion for supporting local farms and food sustainability. Looking to gain her own farming experience, she worked on 2 organic farms in Argentina, followed by an urban farm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She graduated from Washington and Jefferson College with a dual degree in environmental studies and Spanish. In 2016, she began building the local sourcing program for Freshpoint Carolinas, growing from supporting 30 farmers to over 100 local farmers and artisans. In 2022, she began leading Freshpoint's local program at the national level. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, and she can present some amazing information for us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Seneca. Great to be with you all today. I am curious if you are a current farmer, if that chat function is now working, if you could put what commodities you're growing or raising in the chat, that would be great, just to see kind of who we're talking with today, whether you work with livestock, whether you work with produce, whether you have artisan items. I think it's always interesting to see who are we chatting with and what's the frame of reference everyone has. So today I'm going to share my screen and we'll talk a little bit about who Freshpoint is, what is it like to sell into wholesale distribution, and more than anything, I'm hoping that I can help answer questions that you might have, be bringing to the table, because that's really what we're here to do, is how can we help share more knowledge that anyone who wants to get into the food system has access to do so. So I'm going to share through here. Perfect. And we will get rolling. Alrighty. So Freshpoint, Seneca briefly mentioned kind of what Freshpoint is. So Freshpoint is North America's largest produce distributor. We also sell dairy and artisan products. And Freshpoint is a subsidiary of Cisco, the large distributor that's a broadliner. So within the continental United States, as well as Alaska, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Freshpoint has 34 warehouses. So our customers range from restaurants to universities, schools, hospitals, country clubs, corporate dining, cruise liners, anyone who would be part of what we would call the food service side of the food industry, as well as some occasional retailers we also sell to. So when we look at where are we sourcing, how do we bring in product, we source from really all over the growing regions that we can buy product. So we've bought grapes from Chile, we've bought a plethora of product from California, Washington, Florida. But what I'm hoping to chat with you about today is our local program. So back in 2014, Freshpoint began really focusing on how do we build up our local program. It was out of response from customers that this is extremely important to them, as well as a need to support supply chains, have fresher product, and build up support within communities where farmers need access to supply chains. And so Freshpoint began working on finding more farmers and build up a supply of about 300 small and mid-sized farmers that we currently source from. But the goal now is, how can we find more? How do we start building more farmers, diverse farmers into the supply chain, so that we can make sure that, one, farmers are supported and there are as many farmers that would like to be in the supply chain as possible, as well as how can we help customers carry that story through their clients who are eating locally and want to support those farmers. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So here on the screen, these are more or less some of the pieces that we talk with our farmers about as we're working with new farmers. So what would it mean to sell to a distributor? Why do we have a local program? This is the response of what the farmer can get out of working with us. So really, we look to support small and mid-sized farmers, but some of the pieces that we can help on are crop planning, educating on cases and pack sizes that are traditional for our industry. For example, a case of tomatoes is what most folks would say, but when we look at what really does that mean, it could be a case of 5x6 tomatoes. It could be a case of green tomatoes. That case could be 10 pounds. It could be 25 pounds. So there are industry common phrases when it comes to each produce item. And we look to educate farmers on what that exactly means to kind of break down those obstacles so that they're better able to sell into wholesale distribution. Payments, I know that's very on top of mind for most folks. We do pay by direct deposit. Typically, that's another form of calling direct deposit is ACH direct deposit. So typically, our standard is about 25 days. That can go down to 10. So I'd say 10 to 25 days is on average what we pay by. And then we also have various marketing pieces that we offer to farmers, farm bios, various posters that we can help develop for farmers to help carry that story through to end customers. Outside of kind of these pieces, though, what we're going to look at in the next couple slides are how can a farmer make sure that their products are preserved with customers? We often find that when farmers want to sell or decide to sell into wholesale, the big question is, will their farm name be preserved? Are they going to be able to showcase the quality of their products and carry that integrity through to the end customer? And so I think it's really important for farmers to understand when they do sell into a distributor, whether it's Freshpoint or any other distributor, that they know how their products will be represented and how customers will see their products. So that's what we're going to look at right now. From a Freshpoint perspective, what does it look like for those customers? So when we talk with our customers, anyone on the food service side or on the retail side, when we talk about local, these are some of the pieces that we're looking at: shelf life, quality, local reporting, marketing, and we're going to dive into examples of each of those. So we'll start at the very basic side from online ordering. When we buy from a produce, dairy, or artisan farmer, any one of our customers can go into our online portal and search for local, or within some states, local has specific identifiers. So for example, when we ship out of our Central Florida facility, they ship into South Carolina. And so what we need to make sure is that when we have customers in Florida, that those customers can identify local as being within 250 miles from their site, as well as customers in South Carolina having that identity preservation for how they define local. So we do have some of those. The screen that you're seeing with local is specifically for here in the Carolinas, where I'm based. We have 2 warehouses here, and that's how our customers in the Carolinas define local, is by the term local. What you'll see in the lower right-hand corner is how we're working to help solve for kind of simplifying for customers throughout the board. So this was a recent technological update that we came out with a couple weeks ago that we've been working on for the past few months, where we now have an identifier for organic, which is the little green leaf, a tractor, which is the icon that's highlighted, and a heart, which stands for unusual but usable, or UBU for short. It's kind of a number 2 program. So where chefs want to use products that are number 2 grade for soups or sauces or purees, where they don't need necessarily the price point of a number 1 grade commodity, we do stock in our sites number 2 grade, and that can sometimes be linked to reducing food waste as well. So that's what that heart resembles. But the tractor, which is highlighted, allows customers now to click on the tractor and have anything in their order guide sorted for what's local that we have in stock. So that's been a great way for us to be able to identify those items for customers to see exactly what's local. What this, I think, leads to then that we're going to look at is how do we make sure that the farm name is there? So each week at our Freshpoint sites, we publish a weekly local list, which showcases the commodities that are in stock, the farm name, the weight, the location that the farm is at. And this is just one page of multiple. We also showcase items that are not in stock. That could be pre-order. So for example, if you're a farmer that wants to grow Easter egg radishes, and those Easter egg radishes may not be stocked at the Freshpoint site, what we look to do is we'll offer those commodities on the special order side of our local list. So a chef could come in and say, listen, I'd really like 2 cases of Easter egg radishes from this farm on the local list. And we'll then work with that farm to make sure that we can bring it in and have those products represented to get carried out in the supply chain to that customer. So it's not just what's in stock at our warehouse. It's also allowing farmers to grow what they want to grow, and we can still offer them then, regardless of whether it's in stock or not. Beyond produce, we've mentioned a couple times about artisan items. So we do carry artisan items. Each of these little stars signifies that the products are not in stock. So these items specifically, because they're in glass, we don't stock them because glass and produce don't always blend very well. There's food safety issues, obviously, if glass breaks. So we work to mitigate any cross-contamination that could potentially happen, but we still want to offer artisan products to our customers. So in this warehouse, we have these artisan items, as well as some others. This is just what fit on that single page on the local list. And those are offered out to customers. And again, this comes out weekly. So this is a way to show the full transparency and bring that through to the end consumer. Outside of our local list, we do have a website that looks at how do we provide farm bios for those customers. So in the upper left-hand corner of the website, which is called local.freshpoint.com, any customer, you're actually, if you want to go on right now and open up your web browser and search for local.freshpoint.com, you are welcome to. And we allow customers to define local by the middle section where they can select how many miles they would define as local. And then my suggestion would be, rather than searching for crops, I would just hit the magnifying glass and see what pops up. If you'd like to search for crops, you're welcome to. If you'd like to search for a growing method such as organic or sustainable, you're also welcome to. But this allows customers to see who are we buying from, and what are the stories of those farmers. And particularly if a chef wants to have a farm to table event or something where they can start to carry that story on to another section of the supply chain, that's what these farm bios can be used for. So here's an example. If you would click on one of those leaves that are on local.freshpoint.com, it would lead you to a bio that comes as a PDF formulated document. This then carries that story. So as we're working to onboard new farmers, this is something that we ask for. Can you share with us a story of your farm? Help us get to know you and your farm better so we can share that with our end consumers. And I'd say if you are interested in selling to Freshpoint, or even anyone outside of Freshpoint, if you're selling into any other wholesale distribution channel, if I were you as a farmer, I would find this really important. I would always want to make sure, how is my customer portraying the story of me and my farm? And if the customer hasn't necessarily asked you for a farm bio, I would say you should certainly feel empowered to take it onto yourself to provide them that story, to make sure that they have the wording and the terminology that you feel comfortable at your farm and sharing out with anybody else. If whether you have a website, whether you don't have a website, or use social media, it's always key that, you know, those 200 words are really portrayed in a way that you feel comfortable with. So I would certainly say, if you're already working with distribution, you're considering it, but don't have a farm story currently developed, I would highly suggest it, because that can really help customers understand the right words to use. Outside of marketing, we do offer a local report for our customers. So they're able to come to us and say, any time frame throughout the year, we'll say the first quarter of the year, so January to April, March, April. If they'd like to see who the local farms are that they've purchased, they just let us know. We can run a local report, and it will show the amount of cases, the weight in pounds, and there's another column over here that's missing on the slide, but that would be a sales column, so the total sales dollars. And it allows us to kind of push down on greenwashing and show back data, pure data, that says, if this customer wants to have a local event, we may run a local report to be able to see who are the actual farms that they've truly purchased from, to carry that through and make sure there's integrity within the supply chain. So we're quite proud of the local reporting that we've been able to put together. And it's a great way to really show who are the true farms that customers are supporting. Outside of this, I'd say we've talked a lot about Freshpoint, but I would say in general, as a farmer, whether you're selling proteins, whether you're selling produce items, there's going to come a time, whether you're just beginning or whether you're an advanced veteran grower, when you decide, how am I going to expand my channels? Do I want to expand my markets? As we look at what this means, you're either going to have direct to consumer markets, which could be selling through a CSA. It could be selling directly at a farmer's market. And then the other side would be indirect market, selling into wholesale distribution, selling into restaurants, selling into retail. Whichever way you would go, I would say there's always a question on needing to make sure that you're going to make enough money at the end of the day. Wholesale distribution comes into play with volume. So I would say if you're just starting out and you've got 1 acre and you're selling out of everything that you've got direct to consumer, you probably don't need to consider wholesale distribution. But if you're looking at how can I start to diversify my markets to decrease risk that you have in selling direct to consumer, then I would say looking at wholesale is a potential that you may want to consider. One of the most important pieces is making sure that you can trust your buyer. What we've talked about today are just some of the pieces that, as we interact with farmers, that we've found that farmers have provided us positive feedback that that's important to them in building trust with them. Whether it's with Freshpoint or anybody else, though, I would always want to make sure that you feel empowered to ask questions to your buyer as you're beginning in the relationship. Because just with any relationship, you want to make sure that what your opinions are and where you're at are respected. And that's extremely crucial selling into wholesale distribution. So whether it's, whoever the distributor is, I would always be sure that you ask questions, you visit a warehouse, get to know the buyers. Those are really important pieces in building up that trusting piece as time goes on and as you learn, if this is going to work for you or not. Overall, though, I would say distribution looks at volume. And so some farmers will come back to us and say, I haven't needed to spend as much time at a farmer's market myself because I can move 2 pallets by selling it into distribution. Not every distributor is going to be able to take the same amount of volumes, though. So that would be one question that I'd say is important to ask your buyer. At Freshpoint, we will typically not be able to buy a full truckload of one commodity. So whereas, say, a retailer or someone else might have that capacity, we're looking at smaller loads and more frequent loads. So that's always something key to ask as well. I've talked with a couple of rice farmers in the past that want to move truckloads of rice quantities, and we just can't process that. Our warehouses aren't that great, and we don't move as much. To keep products as fresh as possible, we look to have inbound at least 2 to 3 times a week. So we're moving product in and out very quickly, and chefs are getting the commodities as fresh as possible. So I would say that's something to consider. If you need a minimum load quantity to deliver into a customer, certainly ask that at the beginning of the buyer relationship. That was just kind of some random thoughts that just came to me, but hopefully if anyone has questions or whatnot, feel free to put those in the chat. If you are interested in looking at becoming a vendor with Freshpoint, these are some of the pieces on the screen that we would need. We do require a GAP certification. So if you are a dairy supplier or an artisan supplier, this would be more geared towards a GMP or a good manufacturing practices audit. GAP would be for produce, good agricultural practices, and we accept group GAP. We accept pretty much any level. So harmonized GAP, USDA GAP, you name it. If there are questions on that, I'm happy to answer that. Certificate of insurance, also called a COI, is another piece of paperwork that we ask for. The COI does not have to have a required minimum for us. Freshpoint does provide an insurance supplement for farmers that are local that we work with. I would say if you're selling into any other distributor, that is something that you would want to ask. Is there an insurance minimum that you would need to have for your general liability insurance? For us, outside of general liability, we do accept farmers' comprehensive liability. And if there are other liabilities that come into play that you'd like to chat about, we certainly can. I'd say those are the 2 that we typically see most often, is an FCL or a farmer's comprehensive liability and general liability. And for either of those, we do not have a minimum amount required for local farmers. Outside of that, 2 other pieces of paperwork that we would need for new vendors would be a W-9. which you may be familiar with. It's typically used for taxes. It basically shows that you have a viable business, and an ACH direct deposit, which would show where you would want the payments to be processed to, what bank account. Any of that paperwork is sent over via email. And then doing business, once we've got you set up and we're working with you as a vendor, we do ask that invoices are sent as a PDF through email. So that's really important. And then outside of that, we are looking to have a label on the case. So if a chef looks at the case, they can say, okay, this is the farm that I'm buying from, great, as well as weekly communications on harvest, so we know what you're harvesting. Is one of what I think is the most important things for us is making sure that we meet farmers where they're at. When we talk with farmers, they're at all different levels of understanding produce, to understanding wholesale, to understanding the restaurant industry, to none of that. And so I would say if you don't feel comfortable with the paperwork, if you aren't sure where to start, if you aren't sure where to look at a gap audit, please let us know, because we're here to support you and help figure out, even if this process is right. If you have questions on, am I gonna, what does a payment look like for a case of yellow squash? I'd be happy to chat about that, because it's really important to have those questions up front before getting a gap audit, to make sure that you can be a sustainable farmer and a successful farmer for the long run. The payments that are involved in being a farmer, the expenses that you have to go through, we understand that they're high, and mitigating that and the risk in expenses is ideal. We're hoping to do that as much as possible. So I would say all of that is available to you. If you do have questions, please let me know. My contact information's on the screen. You're welcome to send me a text, or feel free to send me an email. If you prefer call, feel free to give me a call. Ideally, I'd say what we're here today to do is to help you feel empowered in expanding your markets. And if there are ways that we can help do that, that's what we're here for. So Seneca and Patrice, I will turn it back over to you if we've got any questions. Oh, Seneca, I think you're on mute.
I apologize. But again, thank you so much, Lauren. I really learned a lot myself, and I know that I will be following up with you with some questions on a couple of things, and maybe disseminating some of this information amongst the farmers that we know at Freedmen Heirs that would be interested. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Patrice so we can put up a couple of slides around questions. And I do think she's going to do some interactive questions for our audience before we answer questions real time. I think you're
Patrice.
also on mute.
I'm muted. Yeah, I just realized it. Thank you. All right, we have a few questions for the audience that we're gonna open up right now. So we're gonna give everyone a few minutes to answer those questions right now. So they should be on the screen. And Lauren, I do want to say too that we did have some participants in the chat that listed some of the commodities that they grow. So Joyce Moore, she grows produce, microgreens, sprouts, mushrooms, and she's a second-year urban farmer. She also grows tomatoes, peppers, watermelon, zucchini, cantaloupe, mint, thyme, basil. I'm not sure what that.
Marjoram?
Marjoram, yes, and hot peppers. We have someone else, Nadia Spats. She grows peas, squash, in summer and winter, and she's from Arkansas. And we do have a question in the Q&A right now from Mr. John Kane. So we're just going to give a couple more seconds for everyone to answer the questions, the interactive questions that are right now on the screen. And then we'll move over to the Q&A questions.
Perfect. And I'll put in just a quick plug for Joyce and Nadia. If you are interested in selling into wholesale distribution, selling to Freshpoint, I would love to chat with you. Looks like I see Nadia, you're based in Arkansas. Our closest warehouse would be in Dallas, Texas. We do have some truck routes that get into Arkansas though. And so we could certainly look to see if there are any backhaul opportunities that if you're not able to deliver it into Dallas, if we'd be able to pick up. So I'd definitely be interested in chatting if wholesale distribution is an interest after this call. And Joyce, same thing, depending on where you're based. If we've got a Freshpoint warehouse that's close, I'd definitely be interested in chatting more.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren.
India.
Okay, we did have some technical difficulties earlier. Apparently, the interactive questions weren't on the screen, so I apologize for that, but I did relaunch them, and I see everyone's answers are generating now. So sorry about that.
No worries. As answers are generating, I think we'll go ahead and kick off with Mr. Kane's question for Lauren. His question is, your local foods map shows no farmers in Alabama, Arkansas, or Louisiana, or Mississippi as well. What are the challenges for recruiting farmers from these states?
Great question. And what I'd actually say, John, the simplest way to answer that is we actually don't have any Freshpoint sites that are in those areas. So at Freshpoint, we define local as grown or made within 250 miles. And so I know they're always looking to find new locations for Freshpoint sites, but at this point, our closest to those areas would be Freshpoint Nashville. We do have a site in Georgia. There are 3 warehouses in Florida, and then going west, we would hit Texas before we would hit any other Freshpoint sites. So there is a gap in southern US in where Freshpoint sites are at, and that's really the main piece, is being able to plug that into, say, a 250-mile radius. So that would be the reason why.
Thank you, Lauren. So another question that I would like to pose to you, Lauren, is in your opinion, what role do wholesale partnerships play in creating a more sustainable and equitable food system? That's part of the question. Second part is, how does Freshpoint contribute to this overall goal?
Great question. I'll start with the first piece first. So wholesale at large can play a big role in being a stepping stone for farmers when farmers first begin at any stage, livestock, produce, regardless of what's being grown. They're first tasked with what food safety certifications do they need to look at if they want to grow. And I would say, taking a step back, there's a really key space where food hubs, direct-to-consumer markets, farmers markets, CSAs, that's really that first stepping stone, the most easily accessible area where farmers don't need a food safety certification necessarily, and they're able to sell their products. Once they max out from there, most farmers are then starting to look at, what do I need to do? How do I get to the next space without needing to go to extremes, kind of what's that middle stepping stone. And so I would say wholesale distribution, depending on the size of the distributor, can be that next stepping stone. And that's where I'd say it's really important to know your buyer, because not all buyers are going to be the same. I would put Freshpoint in that middle stepping stone, because farmers don't necessarily need to have an insurance minimum. For local farmers don't need an insurance minimum. Larger suppliers that would be non-local, yes, they would need to abide by an insurance minimum, but local farmers don't. And so I'd say that that's a check marks in the right box. From there, Freshpoint not needing massive orders and being able to buy one case from one farmer, 5 cases from another farmer. That can benefit farmers where they don't need to have pallets of product to have access into selling into distribution. That's again another piece that you'd want to check with your distributor if that's the road you decide to sell into. Retailers, very large distributors, everyone's going to have their own constraints. And so I would say the 3 stepping stones would be, basic no food safety certification. Middle stepping stone would be food safety certification, but other qualifiers that break down the obstacles. And that 3rd stepping stone would be kind of the most difficult to access at this point, where large growers are more or less monopolizing the market, but make it very difficult based on contracts, earned income, things like that. So getting into that middle stepping stone, I'll tie this into the second part of your question, Seneca, on the equity side and how farmers can make sure that both they can remain represented from being a small and mid-sized farm, as well as if there's a diversity component. Freshpoint has started a BIPOC program with one of our customers back in 2020. The customer is one of our largest customers, and they had committed to paying a market premium for commodities. So that would be like yellow squash, 5x6 red tomatoes, corn, cucumbers, Italian eggplant, what we would call dry East Coast veg. Those commodities are typically contracted out to non-local suppliers to fill the demand. That customer has allowed us to fill those contracts specifically by supporting BIPOC farmers. And so where I would say Freshpoint fits into the equity side as well as in that middle stepping stone is that there's flexibility within our supply chain to provide exactly what customers are looking for, as well as provide a buying hierarchy. So if a customer says, I really want local and I want local to be from diverse farmers, we're both able to onboard farmers pretty easily, provide farmers those quick payments that farmers need, and be able to work the system so that if a farmer needs more money on the back end, we can have those conversations with customers to make sure that a farmer is being represented. In addition to kind of the other pieces that we talked about with local reporting and the farm bios. So I'd say right now, making sure that we're meeting both customers and farmers where they're at and where they need to be is so key to the future of our food system. Because if we aren't representing both sectors of the supply chain, then it's kind of like, well, why do we have a supply chain? The supply chain needs to fill the demands of both upstream and downstream. And that's hopefully the service that we're providing right now. And ideally, we're listening to customers and farmers to continue developing that space to make sure we're meeting everybody and where their needs are.
Excellent. I'm really glad to hear, what you're doing. Next question from Ms. Moore. She wanted to know, are you in or near Indianapolis, Indiana? Freshpoint.
We aren't in Indianapolis. Our closest would be Pittsburgh, which is a distance. We do have a recent acquisition, which is in Chicago. And I'd be happy to chat through and see if Chicago is the right spot, if making an introduction there with our company in Chicago is the right decision. And if not, I think always staying in touch with farmers, even when we don't have a current warehouse, is key, because ideally at some point we may, and then we'll know exactly who to call.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage those that are in the audience to please chime in and ask Lauren any question. Feel free to, just jump into the conversation. So backing up to, the previous question I asked Lauren, and you talked about, looking at some of the small scale farmers versus maybe a farmer that can produce larger volumes. So the next question I have for you is, how does FreshPoint balance the demand for mass produced products with the need to support small scale farmers and providing consumers with locally sourced high quality products?
Great question. Uh, one of the earlier slides that we looked at had the word aggregation on it. And I think that's really the key, is we specifically look to have almost a buying hierarchy where we've got small and mid-sized diverse farmers first. And if it means we need to buy from 5 small and mid-sized farms before looking at large scale farms to fill that demand, that's the goal. So we work with about a 10-acre farm in southeastern North Carolina called New Ground Farm. And New Ground Farm grows lots of specialty varieties, but also a couple key varieties of products that we stock. And so one of those commodities is a variety of Asian eggplant. So it's a purple eggplant that's long rather than the squatter versions of eggplant that you might see more commonly at the grocery store. So they grow Asian eggplant for us. It's a specialty variety. It earns a higher price point, which is great because they're a smaller farm. For us, we will work to buy from New Ground first because they're a diverse farmer and they're a local farmer that identifies as a small farm. From there, whatever is left that we would need for customer demand, we would look to source elsewhere, whether that's a larger local farm, whether that's a non-local farm. That's how we look to see, how do we start to change the supply chain to fit customer needs? Because what customers are telling us is that they really want local product and they want products from farmers where their purchases are making an impact. So when we can make sure that that's provided for in the supply chain, we can maintain better relationships with customers. And so there's an integrity there to make sure that how we're buying and how we're selling are in line with, again, both that customer and farmer mentality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lauren, for that thoughtful response. So now I want to take a short pause and allow Patrice to basically show the answers to the interactive questions. Because I do believe some farmers mentioned some of their challenges, which will lead into another question that we have for you, Lauren. So first question is, have you ever considered partnering with a distributor like Freshpoint to help grow your business? So 67% yes, 33% no. For those that said yes, I think that this is a great opportunity to continue to facilitate a conversation with Lauren afterwards. And for those that said no, I also still think it's a great opportunity to reach out to Lauren and just to learn more about it. It may be for you, it may not be for you, but however, now you have the opportunity to connect directly with someone who can give you insights. Number two, what are some of the challenges you faced when trying to expand your sales market? Patrice, I can't see those answers, so you would have to list them out.
Yes, so I'm going to go ahead and read some of the challenges. So one respondent said that there are very few opportunities in Mississippi. Lauren, and I think you kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, given that, Freshpoint, isn't really located, I guess, in the South. Someone else said learning how to expand their market opportunities. And the last respondent said, speaking on behalf of farmers, I know it's mainly completing paperwork and knowing how to predict the trend of crop in regards to making sure they're getting sales.
I will say for some of those challenges, it would be great to connect directly with Patrice and myself at Freedmen Heirs. A lot of the work that we do, it stems around helping farmers gain access to new market opportunities. But we do know that when looking at these new market opportunities, there may be some education that needs to take place on the front end. So understanding what that means, how to prepare for that. So yeah, we can definitely support you in that area if you would like. And also, I think, and Lauren, you can chime in on this with some of the, and I'm thinking that maybe with some of the producers you've worked with, you've also kind of heard some of those same challenges as well. But what are some additional challenges on top of that? We know paperwork, farmers are great at farming, and they do an excellent job at it, but sometimes paperwork can be burdensome. You have to fill out papers for this and paperwork for that. And then also just understanding what's available in your area. Freshpoint has a very good footprint, but there may be some folks that are on here that Freshpoint isn't in their area yet. And so just hearing from some of the farmers that you work with, what are some of the challenges that you've heard about?
I'll tie in kind of the access piece with trucking and logistics, because when you don't have a customer that's nearby your farm, whether it's a wholesale customer, whether it's retail, that kind of forces a farmer to make a decision on if they're going to buy a refrigerated truck. And that's an expensive investment. And I'd say that's one of the biggest pieces that I hear from farmers is that decision. Do they buy a refrigerated truck? Do they kind of retrofit a CoolBot unit on a trailer? And there's some university publications on that, on how to do it in a cheaper way that still works. But I would say kind of the DIY version of a truck, of a refrigerated truck, is the next option. And then kind of the third, and probably what's least looked at, and rightly so, would be, does a farmer hire out for, say, an LTL or a third party carrier to take a box truck or a trailer to carry their products to a different location? And so those are really big decisions to make. And I would encourage farmers, yes, it expands what your network is to be able to have a refrigerated truck. But if there are opportunities from your county, or if there are opportunities from the state, or if you're able to get federal funds to help cover the cost of those refrigerated trucks, that's ideal. If you aren't familiar with the CoolBot publication, I would certainly look it up. It's basically where you're able to take a window air conditioning unit and retrofit it with a piece of technology called a CoolBot, which allows you to bypass the typical temperature controls on a window air conditioning unit to drop the temperature lower. So I've seen small lettuce farmers that have taken a slab of concrete, put walls around it to build their own refrigeration unit that's on the ground. And they've hooked up two of these CoolBot systems inside, and they've been able to have a perfectly fine cooler. Other farmers have done it within trailers, where they hook up these CoolBot units in a trailer and they're able to refrigerate that. And some have done it with commercial vehicles that are driving to go to a warehouse. But I would say looking into logistics and cold transport is definitely a challenge, but is also a way that you can expand outside of your area to bring your product into new markets. I did see a question, I think, on LTL. Basically, LTL is looking at dividing up a trailer or a box truck so that you don't need to pay for the entire transport of the vehicle. So for example, if you're working with, you may have one pallet of green peppers and your neighbor might have 2 pallets of green peppers. And if you work out with your neighbor to be able to say, hey, do you want to share this box truck? It'll reduce your freight. So LTL would basically be like a mixed load on a truck. And typically it is with a third party carrier. So you're contracting with the third party carrier to divide that up and then give you the freight charge. At times I've heard of farmers that are able to just offer their one pallet to that carrier, and the carrier will fill the rest of the truck with other loads that they have as a way to reduce the freight. So it's always good to talk with various carriers if that's the route you decide to go. But I'd say it's also worth it to ask your neighbors. If your neighbor has a refrigerated truck, if If you're able to go in with a neighbor, with a friend who's also a farmer, and get product to a different area, that helps reduce the cost. And logistics is definitely a cost that if you can reduce it, you will certainly want to.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lauren. So we are getting close to our time, and I do want to make sure that I leave space for Lauren to give any last thoughts that you have.
Certainly. Yeah. So a couple last pieces I would say is before getting GAP certified or before finalizing with a distributor, even if you're already in a relationship with a distributor, I would highly suggest asking about crop planning if you haven't already, where you can chat through specific varietals and price points ahead of buying the seeds or buying the transplants to make sure that whatever that pricing framework is going to be, that you're okay with that. It breaks down the barrier where in the past, produce farmers have been stuck with pricing and markets on whatever they need to be. I would have those conversations up front or ask the buyer if that's something they're able to do, because it reduces the amount of risk that's involved in produce farming. Without doing that, I think we're going to stay in a world where produce farmers don't have as much information as they should have. And that poses a risk to not being able to have as many farmers. So I would definitely feel empowered to be able to do that because other farmers are doing it. So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. And before we let you all go, we have one additional slide. We want to ask everyone to continue to follow us as we have an upcoming webinar in May that is centered around habits that create wealth. And P. Wade Ross, the Chief Executive Officer of Texas Small Farmers and Ranchers CBO, will be our guest. You don't want to miss it. Again, Lauren, thank you so much for taking time this afternoon to join us, to impart your knowledge and insights. We really do appreciate it. To the panelists, we also want to give a large thank you to you as well for joining us for this informative session. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Lauren directly. If you weren't able to get her contact information, we will be more than happy to provide it to you. Patrice, if you can just put it in the chat for folks. But again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Yes, thank you, everyone. And I also want to say too, as you're signing off, you will be prompted to complete a survey. So if you could just take a few moments of your time to complete the survey, that would be great.
And thank you both as well. Thanks, Seneca. Thanks, Patrice. I'm very honored to be invited to be here with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lauren. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.